Okay, now let's discuss a few examples regarding structured charts so that we have a fair idea of what to expect in your exams. Okay, so let's look at this question first. It goes something like this one right here. A flooring company provides for each customer an estimated price for a new job. Each job is given a job ID. Job cost is calculated from the length, which is the nearest meter, and width to the nearest meter of the room. The process of calculating price is as follows. Floor area is calculated with 18% for wastage. Job cost is calculated at $50 per square meter. The structure chart shows a modular design for a program to produce a new job. Now, as you can see here, this flooring job cost, so produce flooring job cost is the main problem here and is divided into sub parts: input job data, calculate job data, and send estimate to customer. There are no loops, there are no decisions. So that means is that these subroutines have to all be executed. Okay, so what we're required to do is we're supposed to fill in the letters A, B, C with their appropriate terms. So by that logic, the statement says that I'm supposed to be inputting the customer ID, customer data, job ID, and the length and width. So I have four what you call it fields that are four parameters that are being passed for input job data. So obviously two of them have to be the length and width. So we can name, okay, by the way, we can call anything here length and width. So it could be B, it could be A, it doesn't matter. What's important is that the values are mentioned here. So two of these missing three values have to be length and width. Now you notice that there is a job ID being generated as well. We don't see it being generated, but we see it being used here. So that means is that job ID has to be generated somewhere. So in that case, the fourth value that is being generated from input job data should be job ID. So I've got length, width, and job ID. So this is the input job data. That's done. After that, for calculating job cost, I'm giving in the length and width. And according to this formula over here, it generates the job cost. And then secondly, afterwards, I want to return an estimate to the customer. So there has to be a job ID, and sending the estimate to the customer means I should be at least mentioning the job cost. So amongst these two missing, common sense states that job cost has to be sent. Now, if I'm mentioning the job ID and the cost of that job, I'm supposed to be addressing the customer, in which case the customer name has to also be sent. So this is the remaining value from here: customer name, job cost, and from here I'm generating length, width, and job ID. We're supposed to fill in these values here. Okay, the second part of this program or this structure chart, it requires us to create a procedure header for the procedure calculate job cost. Now here's the weird part. It's actually returning a value. It's supposed to be returning a value, and still, despite that, it's calling it as a procedure. So what we can do is that instead of treating it as a function, because it's returning something, and it's not a function, that's for sure, because it's labeled as procedure here. What we can do is that we can assign job cost as by reference. So basically, it's a value that's being updated from within the subroutine. So what we can do is that something like this. It would look something like, let's say, For job cost, I have what? I have the calculate job cost parameters length and width are being passed. So we got the length of type integer, nearest, it said nearest meter, so it has to be integer. And that should be length is by val. And then we have by val the width, which is also integer, followed by ref the job cost. And I think it's supposed to be in the same integer. And that should be your function header for your job cost. Ideally, it should be a function. This is the procedure header. Ideally, it should be a function. Why? Because a value is being returned here. This value is being returned. Job cost is being returned here. So, but since it's preferring calling it a procedure, so to get this effect from procedure, what we can do is that we can use job cost with by ref parameter passing technique. Okay, now let's look at another example. Let's see this one right here. In this one, you are required to create a structure chart. Yeah, create a structure chart for this one right here. So this is the place where you're supposed to mention the structure chart. I'm going to draw it right here so that it makes more sense. So anyway, I am supposed to call my main function is item process, and it returns Boolean. And within item process, I am calling add to list and remove to list. And that's it. Okay, so let's see. We're going to have the main program written here. This will be item process. Process. After that, I have two subroutines. You can see here that this is, okay, as you can see here, this subroutine is taking in a parameter and is returning something. It's returning something. So this is definitely a function, whereas this one is a procedure. Okay, so based on that, first thing, okay, secondly, I have these two procedures here, and we have one is to be add to list. We're going to call this add to list. I'm going to simply call it add. And the other one is remove from list. And I'm just going to call it remove. Like so. One thing you notice here is that both of these subroutines are written in an if structure. So that means on certain conditions, only one of these will run. So in that case, this should be a decision box right here. So that means we have a decision over here. I'm choosing one of these two. And my condition is add item is equal to yes. So based on this condition, I can choose either to run this subroutine or this subroutine. Okay, so add to list is a function. And as you can see here, it is returning a flag, returning a flag. So for returning a flag, the arrow that we're supposed to be using is this one. This is my return flag. So we're going to call it return flag. I'm just going to call it return. And similarly, this, since it's a procedure, it's not returning anything. We're going to consider it like this. Okay, but it is requiring some parameters. In which case, the parameter that's passing here is, you can see here, in string is being passed. So the parameter that's being passed to this subroutine is in string. I'm going to call it in string right here. In fact, I'll just call it ins. And in string is also being passed over here. If this part runs, it will also require in string. I'm just going to call it ins here as well. So apart from that, if yes, 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 TK. So this is basically what my stepwise refinement diagram of this only item process part looks like. And obviously item process itself is, think about it, maybe it's part of another program. It's a function on its own. So there's no mention of that here. There's no mention of that here. So we're supposed to only define item process, and based on that item process, stepwise refinement or structure chart should look like this. Okay, let's check out this example as well. Now, as you can see here, my top level program is calling two subroutines here, sub A and sub B. So the question requires us to complete the pseudocode header for the module sub A and sub B. Now, as you can see here, that I have data coupling that's taking place from top level to sub A. So that means I'm passing two parameters, A and B. Along with that, a third parameter C is being updated like so. Now, this is interesting because if it's being updated, that means my parameter is supposed to be passed by ref. If that's exactly what's going to happen here. On the other hand, this subroutine is actually returning a value. So this is most definitely a function. So let's look at how to write the what you call it, the headers for this one. Let's look at sub A first. So sub A, so I'm going to call that as a function. So not a function, but it should be a procedure. It's going to be procedure sub A. It's I don't know what those parameters are, but they have specified the types. So we have A of type string, and then we have B of type integer, and then C of type character. Okay, for C, we're going to call it by ref because it's being updated. And that would be the end of the procedure here. And the rest, I can say that this is by val. Sorry. And also this will be also mentioned by, like so. You don't actually, by val is understood. You don't have to mention it again. If you don't mention it, by default is considered by val, but by ref has to be mentioned. So C here is by, it's okay if you want to mention by val as well. In fact, it actually makes it a little bit clearer, but by ref cannot be ignored. This one is being by ref. Same thing comes here. Let's just say I do the same thing here. Now in this case, this is a function because it's returning a value. So we're going to call it function sub B, and it's taking two parameters, D of type string and E also of type string. and it returns, sorry, returns boolean. Why? Why boolean? Because this filled dot, or this black dot or black arrow, represents a flag being returned. So that's why it's considered as a boolean. So this should be the second function header, second subroutine header.